Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Rita, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Morning, Mary. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it is morning for you. We are in different parts of the world. I don't know if you could tell by Rita's accent. She's in Australia, and I'm in the South in the United States. So I know we're going to have a wonderful conversation about conflict and leadership. But before we get to that, I would like to hear about the first job you ever had as a young person.
So, first job, my gosh, that's now going back too many years, Mary. I was what we call a checkout operator here in Australia for one of our large supermarket chains, Woolworths. It wasn't called Woolworths at the time. In my home state, it was Safeway, so it's had some branding, changes in the last 30, 35 odd years. But yeah, that was my very first ever paid job as a young teenager.
And what was that experience like? What do you remember about the feel of it, the management, and just the experience of it?
So the I remember at the time, I was so the legal age at the time here in my home state of Victoria in Australia, it was 14 and 9 months to be able to gain fully, well paid part-time work or full-time work. But I was combining it with still high school studies. And so I remember at the time feeling a real sense of independence and privilege about, being able to go and get a job and have some independence around, money and things like that. One of my older cousins was one of the supervisors. So she was the person who put my name forward. And then, of course, I had to go through an interview and all those kinds of things. But I remember that the familial contact actually being probably more challenging than helpful because she was my cousin. She didn't want it to appear like there was any favoritism, and nor did I at the time. I was very conscious of that, more so for her, even as a young kind of 15-year-old. But yeah, I remember it, being there were a few harsh lessons around customer service, a few, challenging lessons too, just around speed, efficiency. And I'm sure, in your part of the world, similarly to our part of the world now, people go through and will scan their own items, or we have technology where, it kind of takes a picture of your basket or your trolley. So I'm actually grateful at the time. Those jobs, Mary, that were more manual, less autonomy involved, less technologically based, meant that I think we, from a very young age, got to build skills that meant we had to, cooperate. We had to listen. We had to really pay attention to customer service. We had to learn, that respect and understanding for people. And I do wonder. I mean, with kids now, and my kids, my older kids are a little older than I was at that time, but I do. I am concerned sometimes about loss of opportunity just around learning those base level skills that they don't necessarily teach you directly at in higher education or in university or whatever that higher education looks like.
Yeah. As you were talking, I was just really thinking about, the ability, how important it is to be coachable when you're young, right? And many people are because you don't know what you don't know. It is your first job or your first paid job. And you're going to get things wrong and, and it's going to be pointed out to you. Right? Because customer service is important, because we have to follow procedure, because. And teaching that you don't know it all, that there is an authority structure, that there is a right way or a prescribed way. And I think you're right. Sometimes, people graduate from university, they feel like um, I wonder sometimes if people come out less coachable or less malleable because they've gone through all this education and now they're ready to jump in to the world of work and they've got it in a way.
Yeah, I had that question from one of a group that I was working with recently, and one of the leaders asked me if everybody is coachable, and I think it's a great question. It really it made me think of that just as you were speaking there about whether that younger generation in particular is coachable. I think all people are, but I think the person whoever is doing the coaching, the instructing, the advising, I think we're always best placed asking lots of questions rather than dictating or telling. And I know, my older kids are now 19 and 17. I've got a younger one too, but the two older ones in particular, and one of them, who's now in her final year of high school here in Australia, there is no way that I'm going to get anything through to her with a tell or a
Mhm.
directing, even though she's not yet an adult. And I think where we can go about it through conversation and through almost planting a few seeds, which highlights for the person, here are just some things that you might want to think about. And even that language for some people may be too direct because it's like, who are
Mhm.
you telling me what I ought to be thinking about?
Mhm.
And if we pose it as a question, or is this something you've considered, or, you might want to have a think about this, or something that comes to mind for me, and almost offering it like just for you, around whether you want to take a bite of that or whether you want to pay attention to that. I'm going to leave that up to you, but here's something I'm going to offer you which might enhance what you're currently working on or what you're thinking about. Here's something that might plant a few little seeds for reflection and insight. But ultimately, whether the person wants to take those on board or not is up to them. That's one thing I think that makes it really difficult in the job of leadership, whether you're parenting, whether you're running a community group, whether you're running a large team or an organization. It's that we don't have as much control as what we think, over people.
That is a good lesson to learn. And, when I think my kids are just a little bit older than yours, one of them is 17, and then I've got a 22 and a 24-year-old. And I think about, oh gosh, they're pretty coachable. And when I think about my relationship with them, it's the same. It's I get much further if I am genuinely curious instead of when I tell, it's typically out of fear, it's out of and it certainly can come across as lack of knowing them or lack of trust in them. And so that skill of always pausing and being reflective, do I need to say this right now? Right? Why am I saying this? In what way am I saying this? What am I expecting the response to be if this was said to me? But this whole question about, is everybody coachable? I would say the answer is yes, but we all show up at different times and we're in different places in our life. So maybe not right now and not by you, but maybe in the future, and maybe that will resonate with me.
Yeah, I agree. And in particular, I love that point around not right now, not by you. I think I often say to leaders that the job of leadership sometimes doesn't have as much glory, because
Mhm.
when you're asking a question, a coaching question, or when you're sharing a reflection, the person is not necessarily going to have that moment of insight right then. And
Mhm.
so it's almost this delayed reaction, and it might be in the next hour, that evening, the next week. You're not necessarily going to be there to see that the penny's dropped, they've got the insight, and you get to go, oh, good job, like good job, me.
Right.
We don't have that kind of glory or recognition, rather, and that's sometimes a difficulty. But when we ask a question, I think particularly in coaching and leadership, your job's done.
Mhm.
Really, it's like that old adage of you can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. So
Mhm.
our job is done when we're asking that question. Then what the person chooses to do with that is where the magic happens for them if they choose to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. The magic of curiosity and questions. And I love this idea of, it's really, we're in careers, right? We're in relationships. And so many times we catch ourselves because we want the payoff. We want the light bulb to go off. I used to teach philosophy. And I remember one time I was teaching some adults. And it was a compressed course, 8 weeks. And it was the final exam. And I was going around, somebody had a question. And somebody in the back said, "Oh my gosh, I finally understand what's going on in this class." And I'm like, I'm so glad you understand what we're doing. I wish it wasn't on the day of the final, but insight comes to us all, myself included. I feel like sometimes I have such a hard head, and it might take years before I'm like, that's what was going on. That's the insight.
Yeah, and I think that we've got to be ready to learn it when it's right for us to learn it.
Hmm.
There's no point trying to necessarily drum something in when the person's not ready for that,
Hmm.
and we're not necessarily going to know whether they're ready for it or not. And that's
Hmm.
why our job, I think, sometimes like I said before, we probably can control less than what we think, and
Hmm.
we've probably got to take a little bit of pressure off as leaders and go, well, maybe my job's done here. Maybe I've done enough. I don't need to be all over, almost in a helicopter leader way. I
Hmm.
just, my job is actually less than what I think. it's almost a wayfinder or a guide. And then, whether the person wants to go in that direction or not, it's up to them.
Yeah. I think this also has a lot to do with trust, you know. So, especially if you're working with professionals or whoever is gainfully employed, trusting the person that you have hired to do the job they're going to do, trusting that they're going to be professional, and so they're going to be open to change as and growth as we all should be for the whole our entire life. And so that takes a certain kind of emotional self-control, and the ability to play the long game and to do your part, but you don't have to do their part, which can be really difficult for people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's and trust it's a bit of a dance, isn't it, really? It's
Mm,
how much do I trust you? When do I trust you? Are you creating that safety around me so I can?
mm,
Uh, and then our levels of when we trust differ for everybody. And I think it's often unspoken. We don't we know we get this sense of when we trust somebody, but we don't often share that, or we don't go, oh great, now it's at this point now you've shown me this, so now I trust you.
right, absolutely. So let's go back to you and your career. So what did you major in the university?
Yeah, so I did a business degree, or otherwise known as a commerce degree in some parts of the world, and I majored in marketing and human resources. And I did a lot around organizational behavior. So I always had this real interest in people and dynamics and teams. And one of my favorite units, I was probably second year university student. It was a organizational dynamics unit, and the whole premise of that unit was that we had to be self-led. So the first couple of weeks, we're attending lectures and tutorials, and the teaching staff are there, but they're not guiding us. So literally, all we have is a syllabus. We have our course notes, and we had to work out. We had to become group led, and so that was super super interesting. I was 19 years old. I was like, what is going on here? And particularly because I'd been used to established practices and systems and processes, and gone through kind of a school which wasn't kind of a free range liberal school. It was quite like many schools here in Australia, it followed the curriculum, and um, and it was a religious school too. So we had nuns that were part of our teaching staff. So it was quite, there were different standards that were upheld and all this kind of thing. Um, and then we get into this university course, and it was completely open, and we had to become self-led, and I loved that, and I still think about that today, so many
Mm,
decades on, because we as a group we had to mobilize and really work out what's our purpose here, what are we supposed to do, and we could have, as 19-year-olds, not everybody was 19, but the majority of the cohort was by that stage. We could have just decided to go down to the pub and not, like no one was there saying you've got to do this, you've got to do that, but we didn't. We all naturally, people assumed particular roles, just as they do in workplaces, whether you've got the leadership title or not. And we mucked through. And then by about week 6, they told us kind of the show's up here. This is what we were doing, and we got to then reflect on our experience through the lens of the theory and the research, which was
mm.
super super exciting for me. And that was probably the thing that really made me think about, yeah, this is what I want to do. I'm curious about teams. I'm curious about team dynamics and organizational behavior, human behavior. And that was really the thing that really sparked me around what I wanted to do.
How interesting. You know, and it kind of
Mm.
goes along with what we've been talking about, like with questions, this openness. So many times we want to fill in the blank for people. We want to be directive and tell them, but it really does stunt growth. I mean, there's a place for that, obviously, right? But there's also a time to step back and to let other people, fill in the blanks and decide what the structure is going to be within a broader structure, right?
Yeah, there is. And that is, you touched on trust before, and a leader handing that control and power over to others and going, well, I'm here if you need. As you said, sometimes, you got to pull out what I call the captain's card or the captain's call on certain things, but it also takes a whole lot of trust from the position of the leader to really think about what are the capabilities that already exist in the group? What's the knowledge, both theoretical and human experience knowledge, right? The common sense type of knowledge. what already exists in the group, and does this group have what they need in order to be able to figure this out
Mm.
without my very direct intervention or involvement? And that, all of that is not about that moment. It's about all the moments beforehand. It's like when you're building your team, when you're recruiting your team, when you're building them, what are you equipping them with, and what are you helping them to develop and grow in? So then at that time, when you need them to step up, your job's done. It's hard to build that um, as you go. Yes, diamonds are, created under pressure and all that kind of stuff, as we know, but it's all the investment that we're putting in before the actual event and whatever it is that, that time that the team's really got to step up.
I love that because it's just so true when we think about, so I just think about conflict all the time because that's what I am interested in. And a lot of times people want to deal with conflict when it's been going on for a long time. And I'll be called in or somebody will say, "Oh, this is what you do for a living. Oh, we don't have any conflict. We don't need your services." And I think, no, that's exactly when you need it, right? You need to practice, you need to have systems, you need to have relationships. And how do you work well together when something goes wrong? How do you disagree well together when these disagreements come up? Because they will. There will be difficulties. There will be shifts in the market. There will be boom and bust, and just so many things that will happen. So, preparing for the inevitability of conflict, if the conflict not being bad, so it can be managed. But when other things do pop up, preparing for it so that when it comes, there are systems in place and there are processes to follow. So it doesn't need to become toxic or poisonous or detrimental. It can be seen and dealt with fruitfully for the benefit of the individuals in the organization.
It's like anything, I think, Mary, that we often we realize what we need when it's, I don't want to say too late, it's too negative, but almost when it is too late.
Hmm.
And the reality is that the things like putting in systems and processes for maybe not avoiding conflict, but for helping people to, I'll use Patrick Lencioni's term, but to kind of move into productive conflict with
Hmm.
ease. Even leadership, deliberate leadership practices, even if I think about fitness and health, it's all those things that we're doing on a daily basis. And I think for a lot of people, it's like, oh, but do I have to do that every day? Do I have to eat well every day? Do I have to go to the gym or exercise, move my body every day? Do I have to drink 2 liters of water every day? It's like, yeah, you do. If you want the benefits that come with that consistency of practice, then you got to do that stuff every day. And I think that's where a lot of people uh, they don't realize that it is a practice. A
Hmm.
lot of these things that we talk about in workplaces, it is a practice, and that is doing it all the time. Kind of enhancing the way that we're doing things, building in that reflective practice too around, well, how did that go? Could that have gone differently? Equally, what did I do really well in that? Um, it's the boring stuff, but it's the necessary stuff if we want that smoothness and almost that effortlessness to be felt along most things. I'm not going to say 100% of the time, but most of the time.
Yeah, I love that. It meant that the boring stuff. It's the day in, the day out, so that we can see it. So we can see when there's a conflict, and so that we can, we there's unnecessary conflict that happens that we could take care of if we're being intentional and we have good practice and we have the ability to have dialogue with people. When something happens right away, we can address it instead of letting it simmer. And in the practice, right, I think as you were talking, I was thinking about back to trust. If we think about what it takes to build trust and how easy it is to lose it, right? And all it takes is not be, you could just not have a good day and you can break the whole system, right? You can spill the beans, you can drag a colleague through the mud, you can stand up and yell at a meeting. And depending on what has preceded you, how much you can, how quickly you can do damage control. But we're never in our living room, when we're at work. We are always being professional. I mean, I think even in our living room, we ought not be yelling or treating anybody poorly, right? Um, but I think it is, always being mindful. Yeah, you always have to be mindful. You always have to be acting according to your principles. And what happens when you don't really shows us why we always need to be.
Yeah, it's my favorite quote on trust is it's a Dutch proverb and it's trust arrives on foot but leaves on horseback. And it's
Mm,
exactly what I'm saying there. Like it's broken in an instant and we don't
mm,
even know sometimes
mm,
uh, because we're not aware. Sometimes we don't even have to open up our mouths. It's that we walk in with a different energy that's misaligned to the other person. They go, "Oh, what's that about?" All of a sudden, they feel unsafe, or they feel like, "Oh, what's going on? They're keeping something from me." So it's trust for me is a constant. It's almost represented like your infinity symbol, but broader than that, it's a constant exchange of credits and debits. Right.
mm,
So we're not going to get it right all the time because
mhm.
we're not robots. We're not always going to be on our A game.
Right.
And sometimes we will, maybe not act as professionally as what we would like to if we're not, for whatever reason, if we're not feeling right. And therefore, so a few debits will be, made, and then we've got that opportunity to add in a few credits. And it's as long as we're like a good bank balance, as long as we're more in credit than debit, then that's a good thing. But we're not going to get it right 100% of the time because we're human. And I think that's where the understanding piece comes in. And
Mhm.
it's just giving people a little bit of the benefit of the doubt and going, okay, we're not always going to be on our A game.
Yeah.
And I'm just because we've had this whatever slip, I'm not going to necessarily let that impact everything. I'm going to get curious. I'm going to understand what's going on for that person. Maybe it's not about you at all.
Mhm.
Maybe it's about something that's going on for them that you're not aware of.
Yeah, a human workplace realizes mistakes. Mistakes are normal. They're going to happen. We wish they weren't because it can be so, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, or I wish I had paid attention to this, or whatever it might be. But it's just normal. It's going to happen. And so baking that in, as you said, being curious and being responsive and not reactive and being thoughtful as to how we would want to be treated when we make mistakes, we can extend that to others. And, in I think in our work environment, it is this community. We are colleagues. And so the relationships that we have are built. And so the more we work towards having these authentic relationships, the more we can take. But if they're brittle, they will break very easily and more with more of a drop of how we're actually going to repair whatever has happened if we haven't been investing in the everyday. It is found in the everyday, just like you said, it's a look or it's a I got dropped from this email again, or somebody didn't acknowledge my contribution. And so we're always taking the temperature, so that intentionality of how we're showing up in the everyday.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why it's uh, very rarely is it the big blow up or the big argument. Thankfully we don't tend to see that too much in workplaces these days. We
Mhm.
people have generally got a better sense of what is appropriate and acceptable behavior. We've learnt a lot about um, psychological safety, bullying and harassment, all those things that means we've got a better understanding of how we ought to behave in the workplace. But it's all the little stuff that, just kind of erodes at trust. And if we're not creating that environment where people can say, hey, I just want to talk to you about that, then that's got the opportunity, I think then for it to become large and significant.
Yeah. And we do talk a lot about psychological safety these days. And if we want that sweet spot of engagement and collaboration, then people need to have the belief that they can, that they can speak up without fear of retribution, that they're really wanted, their voice really is wanted to be, people want to hear it. So you have a great blog post. I'd recommend anybody going out to your website and reading these, but one is called Collaboration versus Polite Cooperation. And that really caught me because I think a lot of our might think, gosh, I would love just a little polite cooperation because it's chaotic or possibly toxic. But tell us a little bit about the difference or what you see the difference of polite cooperation versus actual collaboration.
Yeah. And thank you for mentioning that one. I think that one was really well received. because it resonated for people. So polite cooperation is very surface, actually. We're not, Brene Brown uses the term mucking in together or getting into the arena. We're not doing any of that in polite cooperation. We're just watching P's and Q's, we're being courteous, but we're not getting into any deep kind of stuff. In collaboration, the reason I love that word so much, and I think about it often in the Thomas Kilmann conflict model, collaboration is that top right hand quadrant of any two by two is always where we want to be, right? In the middle, though, of that model sits, cooperation. And cooperation is not collaboration. It's actually compromise, not cooperation. But in the middle, if I've got a cookie and you want half of that cookie, then I can split it. And that means that we both get half the cookie. So we've compromised, but ultimately it's still kind of lose-lose because we both want a cookie. But if we then look at, pulling together our resources for how we go and find another cookie, then that's collaboration. And that would require negotiation, it would require stakeholder management, it would require some strategy, some innovation, some ideas, some creativity, all of that, right? We could get some ingredients and make another batch of cookies, and then we've got as many as we want, right? All of that is much deeper, and it requires that collaboration requires a deep understanding of our individual purposes, our goals. Where do we want to go in this? What do we want to get out of this? And that's not selfish or egotistical. That's just being real. Because if we're working, then yeah, we're going to want something out of it. If we're working on a project or some kind of negotiation, you're going to want something, I'm going to want something. And the clearer we can be about
Mhm.
that with each other, then we can work to a solution, which is, well, let's try and satisfy both of us as opposed to you lose, I win, or vice versa.
Mhm.
So polite cooperation means for me, it's a short-term strategy, which means things will be collegiate and polite and cooperative, as it suggests, but we're not going to really get very far. And in time, that polite cooperation has an expiry date because you can't do that forever. Because that polite cooperation ends up feeling like resentment. It ends up feeling like we're not really on the same team, like we're just kind of being courteous. That's it. But when
Mhm.
we're collaborating, one plus one equals three. We get to come up with different things, different ideas, and things that I may not have considered if it weren't for your input. And as a result of that, I'm grateful for you kind of mucking in with me and doing this together. That for me is collaboration. So harmony is really important in a team, but I'm much more interested in sustainable harmony, which gets us doing deeper work, really impactful work, versus just kind of working together and it feeling nice.
Mm. I love that. I love everything that you just said. I'm writing a book right now about generational differences, and it's really a book about dialogue. And as you were speaking, I'm thinking about, dialogue. Dialogue is me and you together, right? And this engagement and the creativity. And so, if you want to take advantage of all of the gifts and talents and insights and experiences that people have, which breeds innovation and creativity, then it can't just be surface. As you were talking, I just absolutely saw what you were, that this vision of this is okay. We're keeping the peace, but peace at any cost isn't peace, right? And it's not, it doesn't satisfy. And so if we really think about the goals of a particular part of the job and the goals of individuals in their careers, right? And this broader picture, how do we have this collaboration? Well, we have to be able to disagree well. We have to have rules of engagement, and we ought to expect that we should disagree, that that's a good sign. And but if we're just trying to keep the peace, now again, if trust has been broken and things have exploded and people are yelling at each other, right? So we might think about how to build back. And maybe for some teams, this is a path to go through, and maybe it isn't. Of course, it depends on what has happened and what has transpired. But but simple, just I could just see just the sort of the toxic positivity of just smiling and nodding and then going doing your own thing. Then everybody's an island, and we don't really get the richness of two heads are better than one and three heads and so forth.
Yeah. I think, Mary, you know what you said there about you're writing a book about, as I'm saying, about generational differences, but it's about dialogue.
Mhm.
And when I'm working with teams around, working with different styles, as an example, to try and preempt and avoid conflict, not that or conflicting well. It is the analogy I'll often use is when I go to a different country that's not English speaking or Italian speaking, so I speak both English and Italian, then I will do my best to learn a few phrases in that national language. So when I arrive, those that are there know that I've put in a little bit of effort. Now, I do that because when my experience in traveling is that when you learn a few phrases in that native language, people go, oh, they might not share it with you, but the feeling that they have conveyed in the past to me is thanks very much. You've gone to the trouble of understanding our language, of trying to immerse a little bit in our culture, and it actually helps us to be better understood. So it is absolutely, and I'm taking it there quite literally about dialogue, but when we can demonstrate an interest in, I'm going to just learn a few phrases in your language and maybe that's in your personality style and your thinking style and your working style. It's not necessarily my language, but I'm going to try and learn it because that's going to help you to understand me and me to understand you. And I think at the root of most conflict exists a void of this
Mhm.
seeking to understand. Like,
Yeah.
where we've got particularly ongoing conflict, what we see is that there's no interest in understanding the other person's opinion because
Right.
we fundamentally don't care, right? We
Right.
we kind of go, well, I'm only interested in fighting for my position because I know what I want.
Mhm.
I don't really care. Even if I do know what you want, I don't really care about what you want. I'm just going to fight for what I want.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is what leads to systemic ongoing conflict, relationships that break down, either one to one or many in a team. It's where we don't care to understand, and I
Mhm.
think just learning a few phrases in their language, whether it's their personality, their thinking style, their working style, means that it's then harder to ignore it once you've sought to understand it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and look, I don't know that that's a silver bullet to all conflict. I suspect it's not. However, I think that would go really far to just helping mitigate some of the consequences that we see from severe conflict that goes on for years.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. And that is what I see. People have been damaged. They've been, however, they have perceived the pain that they have. And so eventually they just cut off and they just say, this person has done these things. I'm out and I'm just fighting for myself, which um, it's counterproductive, especially if both people are still there, right? And so we get this binary of win-lose, and everybody is losing, not just the two of them, but the team and the organization is losing when we think that way. And so, right, Marshall Rosenberg says everything that we do, we're either building bridges together with our language or we're distancing ourselves. And we are a community wherever when we're with other people, we're in a community and work, we spend so much time, we're trying to accomplish some sort of task together. But if we've already said, I don't care about you as a person, and I don't care, I'm just going to get what I want. Nobody's going to get what they want, and everybody is we're not even going to get compromise, really. We're going to get these entrenched positions, never getting down to what the needs are so that we can actually make progress.
And
So
it's sad. Sorry, I was going to
go
say
ahead.
it's just sad for humanity. It's sad for humanity, and that we forget there's a human at the other end, just like us. You know,
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
sometimes it's so simple, and if we just remember there's a human on the other side of that, and they feel like we feel, and they have needs as we do, then I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in the issue that we forget the humanness of it. And if we can bring it back to the humanness of it, maybe that might help us just to kind of go, okay, I'm going to slow it down here. I am going to seek to understand because there is a human on the other side of that opinion or that
Yeah.
feeling.
Yeah. I think a lot of conflict resolution is doing that, is de-escalating yourself, because by the time we're in this kind of conflict we're talking about, the other person is the villain. And so because they're a villain, they're not going to be able to change and they're causing all this harm. But if we can humanize them again and start looking at the problems can be solved. we can get creative about specific issues. We're not going to be changing personalities at work, and that's not the business of what we ought to be doing. But when we start right sizing and looking at what we can control, back to we don't have as much control as we think. Okay, well, what do we have control over? And if this is problematic for me, the temperature, the hours of the meetings, or whatever it might be, okay, well, then I can work on this bite-sized thing and see what kind of progress can be made.
Yeah, agree.
So, when you think about your relationship with conflict and conflict at work, can you tell us about a situation you had, maybe younger in your career, of something that had happened, a conflict, and how you dealt with it, and now the vantage of where you are, if you would have done anything differently?
Yeah, probably hard to think about a specific case. A few come to mind. It's probably where relationships have been fractured because we've had points of difference. And I think about even in the last 20 this year I celebrated my 21st leadership birthday. I wrote about that. So it's 21 years since I have ever led a team and have led teams since. So that there's been plenty, particularly during that time. I think the ones that stand out are where there's been difference of opinion that has actually not been clear. The two in particular that stand out is where there's been friction in the relationships with colleagues and not really understanding where it comes from, but just getting a sense of negativity, that negative energy, where that there's a point of difference. Ultimately, within both scenarios, one, we were able to sit down and try and work it out, and we were able to have some more open conversations. We still had to agree to disagree. But by that time, a good 12 or 18 months had passed, and we kind of had forgotten on what it was that we were in disagreement about anyway.
Yeah.
And I think that's where there'd been so much water under the bridge, but not positive. Like there'd just been so much, we kind of forgot the real thing that
Mm,
I suspect it was because thinking back now that we were both working at the same level, there was probably a bit of competition in there
mm,
and not really being able to sort that out in a positive, healthy way. So this person was leading a team, I was leading a team, we're at the same level, both kind of competing for the next role above us and it becoming negative and to the point where we kind of you do your thing, I'll do my thing. But it's not a moment. If I think back, I'm not proud of that time. I'm not proud of it for a number of reasons. One, I didn't really seek to understand that person, and it was earlier on in the career where we're trying to climb ladders really quickly. Definitely not much interest for understanding, and being quite selfish and egotistical about kind of building a career, not really thinking about others, around me. And the other reason I'm not proud of it, which is probably the most important one, is because of the poor role modeling I would have done for my team at the time.
mm,
It wasn't let's muck in and have this conversation with this person and let's try and sort it out. It ended up then, the teams underneath us understood that there was tension between the two of us, and therefore that impacted them too. It impacted their ability to collaborate, to do
mm,
work. They were largely resources doing the same work, but in different parts of that business. And it absolutely then impacted business outcomes.
mm,
So I think in retrospect, the learning from that really, was about probably not being so selfish and egotistical, about driving to, do what I wanted to do. And that was the outcome of that was that I was building my career and building kind of, successes and runs on the board. But it was, I guess the smoke screen was that we were doing stuff to support the business. We obviously were. It wasn't,
mhm,
me just building my career. It was doing stuff to support the business. But I think it could have been done differently. We could have had much more positive business outcomes and quicker results in certain areas had we put aside that personal kind of conflict, which largely was a difference in personality. And a little bit of the beating of the chest. I've got more experience. No, my experience is better. No, my qualifications better. It was this kind of competitive stuff.
mm. You know, we all grow and develop, right? And so a big part of leadership is being reflective and seeing what your strengths are and where you need to be growing. So, if we think about young leaders, what kind of advice would you give them so that they could be properly reflective? Because I imagine your younger self as this leader, that would you have thought of yourself as being reflective and a good leader, but this was a blind spot. We all have blind spots. How would you help somebody see those blind spots?
Yeah. Mary, I think, for younger leaders, and I'm going to speak based on my own experience, I was in such a rush, right,
Mm,
to build a career and to progress. And therefore I didn't really value reflective practice because I saw it as slow
mm,
and and I'm terribly impatient. And I still am impatient, right? But now I'm aware of it. But that need to go fast meant that I didn't value the reflective. And in fact, I used to walk around, 15, 20 years ago, I'd openly share with my girlfriends. I'd say, oh, I don't have any intuition whatsoever. The intuition has always been there,
mhm,
but it was completely clouded because I was kind of engaging prefrontal cortex for thinking, not engaging feeling, not engaging just energetically, how is this feeling, using my guide as and my instinct, which is there. So it was always there, but I hid it, and I
mm,
actually didn't hid it. I um, submerged it because I didn't like the fact that if I had to engage in that reflective practice, I felt like it would slow me down.
mm,
And so, advice to those that are developing their careers would be don't be afraid to go slower because you're actually not going to miss much. And in
mm,
fact, just taking a bit of time and building into your leadership practice time for reflection, which is one thing we talk about in deliberate leadership. You must do that because it helps you see those blind spots. It helps you listen to when people are highlighting a blind spot for you. And if you've created the right circumstances for trust and feedback, they'll do that. And when you've built in reflective practice, you don't miss those opportunities.
mm,
Uh, if you do miss those opportunities, you'll just keep running into the same issues
mm,
until something significant happens. And then you go, oh my gosh, I do need to stop. Like this has now hit me so many times that I
mhm,
need to be paying attention to this. So
mhm.
it's, yeah, that reflective practice, I'd say build it in. It doesn't need to look like meditation for an hour every day. Like often that's the misnomer. People think,
Mhm.
oh, I don't have time for that. Go on a walk around the block, for 5 minutes and just sit or just think about an issue. Or while you're cooking dinner, or while you're sitting in the sunshine, or while you're doing something with your kids, or whatever, right? Just sit and think for a minute and just give yourself literally a minute, 5 minutes, just to think about the issue. And I think building in that reflective practice, slowing it down a little bit, will create gains for you in the long run. And don't be afraid of that.
So tell us about your organization. Is it the deliberate leader or deliberate leadership?
Yes, the deliberate leader is the business, and what we do is we exist to support leaders to become more deliberate. And so leaders often will they exist in leadership, often through accidental means. So they've
Yes.
been promoted because they're a great technical expert, and someone goes, "Congratulations, here's a team," which is very much my journey and that of many others. But we go into it without really any leadership experience. And so my aim is to help leaders to go from accidental to deliberate, to be less haphazard, to be really considered and intentional about how they're leading. And the key three things that we focus on are your energy, your relationships, and your performance. And we wholeheartedly believe that if you can have those three things, like spinning wheels, spinning evenly and well, then you have that ability to be very deliberate in how you lead and how you live ultimately.
I absolutely love that because so many, as you said, leaders, they fall into it. And I think what an awful thing to fall into. You're good at this technical skill, and all of a sudden you're supposed to be in the mess with people, that you're supposed to be supporting people in all of their multifacetedness. And especially that first rung, those middle managers get such poor support. And so to really turn that around to being deliberate. So tell us how you started your business.
So the business started 7.5 years ago, and I left a large corporate role. So I was the vice president of people and culture at a university here in Victoria. It was a large business with lots of, big team, big budget. I was really tired. I was tired on a number of fronts, family commitments, but I think at the time I thought, yeah, it's the right time to jump off, the corporate wheel and to do my own thing. That was the impetus for it. But more importantly, I felt like I wanted to have a bigger impact and not just one in one organization at one time. And so I had a real desire to really support leaders to lead well. So the catchphrase started with, work well, live well. And, it was all about optimal fulfillment and being able to find that fulfillment. And over the 7.5 years, that message has, kind of found its tuning point almost. And I've had to work hard on helping it to be crystal clear so I can understand it and people can understand it. The real reason is I saw too many leaders really failing at leadership, and not just at leadership, but then at life. They were miserable, burnt out, their relationships were suffering personally and professionally, and they weren't finding joy from it. So these days, we work one-on-one with teams, and sorry, one-on-one with leaders and with teams. And the whole point is let's get really, really crystal clear on what your purpose is, what your impact needs to be, and what you want it to be. And then let's make sure we're focusing on your energy. So you're, kind of feeling well and feeling like your best self. But then also your performance, your team's performance. And then let's not forget relationships, because that's kind of the lubricant, that trust, that collaboration, how we do things together, is what helps, to achieve that success and for us to be deliberate.
That's wonderful. I mean, it really is such a gift to not only the leaders, but then the people who are being led by them. We have all had the experience, or hopefully most of us have had the experience of working for an excellent leader. And there's just nothing like it. It's you, yeah, it's like breathing, you can just breathe. And far too many of us have had the opposite experience of working for maybe not somebody who's toxic, but someone who just doesn't really know what they're doing. And they might be a fine person and you might like them just fine, but they just make a mess of it when it comes to managing the people aspect. And that I have found so much, it's not so much the work that people are doing, it's the people around them. How do they feel? How are they welcomed there? Do people want them there? Are they cared about? And people will stay in an organization, even if maybe the work doesn't resonate as much with them, but if they feel good and supported and cared for, and vice versa, it could be your on paper dream job, and people will leave if they can, if the environment is chaotic, possibly toxic. It's so much how it feels to be at work.
Yeah. And with so many of us dedicating many, many more hours to work, whether, particularly in the leadership roles, in the middle leadership role, in that middle level, whether we're working from home or working in organizations, where our mind is there. And so you want to feel like you're committed and you're belonging to something and being led by someone that really does inspire you and really does help you to find your impact and the impact that you want to have through this, lifetime, even if it is for a chapter of your life, because you'll go on and do different things. But the role of the leader is so important in being the catalyst for that. And that's why I think it's dangerous when we put these accidental leaders in
Mm.
and they're not, they've got unfortunately, the risk of doing so much harm unwillingly, often and
Yeah.
unintentionally, but it means that they're not bringing out the best in people and therefore not creating, the business results that they could be creating.
I like that you use the word dangerous because I don't think that is hyperbole. It really is dangerous. If we're not getting the business outcome, then there's a good chance the business will fold and everybody will be out of work or they'll be left behind or whatever it might be, let alone when you have somebody who um, maybe not intentionally, but is really doing a poor job and it just negatively impacts the physical and mental health of the people who are subject to that poor leader. So, do you have any advice for people who are suffering under a poor leader of what they can do to either manage up or if they can't move out of that situation?
Yeah, I think often it's about connecting with what your
Mm,
purpose is and what value you bring. So first and foremost, it's let's, bring it back to you for a moment and just look at what am I here to do? What's the value that I bring? What's my purpose? Why am I here? The leadership question, what you do about that, it is a risk for people to kind of put themselves out there and give that feedback to the leader to say, hey, I want to give you some feedback about how we have conversations, the fact that we don't have one-on-ones, the fact that you ignore me, whatever it is, the fact that you speak to the team in a way that doesn't motivate us, whatever it is. I think it's finding an opportunity to have those conversations and for it you need courage, right?
mm,
And often because of the power imbalance and because the leader is making decisions about our remuneration, our bonuses, our promotional opportunities, we often don't because we think, oh, I'm just going to sit back and do my thing. But this is where everybody in the team has the opportunity to lift up and actually demonstrate leadership. Leadership is not just by the title that's bestowed upon you. It is a mindset. And often in teams, what I see is others, not so much the leaders by title, but actually others that you see rise up and really take on almost, in academia, we call them those service leadership roles, and it's very much in service of the team. So I think everybody can do it, and I think it's finding a way to give that feedback so it feels safe for you to give that feedback, but also so you feel that you are almost giving a gift to the person. I know that's really
mm,
cliche, but if I can go in, and I really strongly believe that when we're giving feedback, we need, there's a pre-step in giving that feedback, which is the intention you want to have with that feedback. And
mm,
if we go in with the intention of this is an offering for you, uh, and whatever they choose to do with it, we have no control over that. But as long as we're clean about our intention, that we're
mm,
not trying to cause harm, that we're not trying to shame or embarrass, and that we're coming at it from a perspective of helping the broader team, not just you, then I think that's a good starting point. But
mm,
it does take courage, it does take risk. I think, bounce it with somebody else first before you're
mm,
having that conversation with the person. Get some feedback about your approach. Talk to people that really know the person well, if you can, and just get some insights and also pick your timing.
mm.
I think you said earlier in this conversation, sometimes our timing is the thing there's nothing wrong with what we have to say, but we've just picked the wrong time, and really think about and ask the person, is now a good time to give you this feedback? I've got something important I want to share with you. But if they're having a frantic day running from this to that and they've got some stuff going on in their personal life, pick your time,
Mhm.
and really help them by giving them that opportunity to really be able to hear you when you are giving them that feedback.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you started with work on yourself, right? Because when we are having a problem, we have so externalized it many times. They are doing this, they're not doing that. Okay, well, be that as it may, just taking that time to realize, well, what am I about? What are my goals? What is my mission? What am I doing here? And getting really clear on that, I think can help bring courage and clarity and that clarity of intention. What am I really trying to do here? And just because though you are clear and you want to be kind, doesn't mean that you speak, right? It really does matter what is going on with this person and the timing and using the virtue of wisdom, when to speak, when not to speak. And but the more you work on yourself, the more you can realize, is this a place I can stay given this structure? Is this a place that's possible to change? Can I move someplace else? But that is empowering when we bring it back to ourselves. So I'm in a situation where I don't like. What am I going to do about it? And then it's a problem to start working on so that you can. Again, yeah, right. Leadership, you can't really have the title of leader by the outside. It's really how you act.
Yeah. It's a mindset and it's acting like a leader all the time, and really, taking on those characteristics and capabilities and demonstrating them throughout your whole life, not just in that role that you've got, which is a leadership role.
Yeah. So, Rita, when you think about the future of work and you think about your kids out in the workplace, what do you think needs to happen so that not only will all workers be treated with dignity and respect, but that people will be encouraged to thrive and flourish?
Yeah. Great question, Mary. I think what needs to happen is going back to basics on purpose and going back to basics on impact. What's the thing that we're trying to change or to resolve or to adjust or to contribute to? Each person knowing how they contribute to that. So each person feeling really valuable in that. They've all got a contribution they can make, be it big or small, but it is a contribution. So it's, for me, it's clarity, clarity of message, clarity of where we're going, strategy. I think with things moving so quickly, whilst we've got lots of tools that can help us sharpen clarity and sharpen our strategy and our language, because it's moving so fast, we have the ability for that to become cloudy really quickly.
Mm.
And I think that's part of that reflective practice. Just slow down, make sure you don't lose anybody as you're steaming ahead and trying to keep up with competitors and everything that's going on. Uh, so really, really clear communication, slowing down, helping everybody understand their purpose. And I think the other thing, and because, and maybe it's because of the age of my older children, my youngest is 10 and still starting to see some of that. I think there's unfortunately more instances of challenges with mental health that we're seeing, and we're
Mhm.
certainly seeing it here in Australia. I've got some data that tells me we're also seeing it globally.
Mhm.
And so, because of that, I think it's really important that we operate from a strengths-based perspective, and we're not telling people often enough what we're seeing. It's more than recognition. It's
Mhm.
helping them to connect in with their strengths and go, well, if that's your strength and that's your position of being strong, then let's leverage that and let's get you doing more of that.
Mhm.
So we still go in and we like spot the gaps, or there's a blip there, we've got to work on that. What I have learned is that, the older we become, and I don't want this to be an ageist comment, but the older we become, the harder it is to fix our gaps.
Mhm.
And it's probably because we can't fix them.
Mhm.
And that behavioral awareness, and therefore then the impetus to change stuff becomes harder and harder because, well, I've been doing this for so long. It's just hard. So it's not to say that we should ignore blind spots and ignore weaknesses and gaps, but I think if we come at things from a strength-based perspective, and
Yeah.
particularly generations, we really help them to connect in with their strengths. I think they'll be happier, and they will also operate from a position of, well, this is the value that I bring. This is what I'm really good at. I acknowledge I'm not good at everything and we're not meant to be. But
Yeah.
it's that strength based, and being really clear on that purpose, as I said, and that intention, and slowing down so you don't lose people because things are happening so fast. So just take the time and check for understanding.
Mm.
And if you do lose people along the way because they've gotten a bit confused, or just go and get them, and don't discard them because they've
Mm.
still got stuff to contribute, but things are happening fast.
Yeah. I love that because we've been talking a lot about teams, and I can see my need for others when I understand what I'm bringing to the table. Instead of this idea that everybody should be good at everything, then it is just we're going to get mediocre, right? We're going to be spending all this time on this thing I can't really get or I'm not very good at. So I will get marginal at it instead of spending all that time at positive psychology. What are you good at? Let's get better at that. And so then now we've got people excited, engaged, creative, and I also see that I need you. I can't do it alone because I'm great, but not great at everything. And you're good at this thing. And seeing that, articulating that, and building teams based on that. So we have this cohesive whole instead of everybody has to do everything at a C level, like a mediocre, right? Because we all need to be able to do this.
Yeah. And that's
Absolutely.
really, I mean, we've spent quite a bit of time in talk discussing collaboration today. And that's where collaboration, when we know that we can all contribute a part, then that's collaboration. It's like when
Yeah.
someone says, someone's hosting a barbecue and everyone's on different salad. You bring the salad and you bring this and you bring that. A great meal always ends up coming together because we've all had something that we're contributing. We know what we're contributing, so you're not doubling up on a potato salad or a coleslaw or whatever it is. We all know what we're there to bring, and that's great. Like it's a a meal that's got diversity in it, and it's unique in its own way, but it also is harmonious because it comes together. And I think that's what we need to do in teams. We need to celebrate the individual with all their strengths, and their flaws, not try so much to fix their flaws unless it's creating, significant toxicity in the team.
Right.
But just helping people be really clear about what it is that we're doing and why.
Mm. I love it. Rita, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Likewise, Mary, I've enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you.
Take care. Rita, thank you so much for being on Conflict Managed. And I encourage you to go check out her podcast as well and everything over at The Deliberate Leader. Such a great way of thinking about leadership. Yes, deliberate, intentional, and what that brings. So if you're a leader, but you're not quite so sure you're being deliberate about it, I encourage you to go and check out her business and what she has to offer and all the different leadership ways in which you can grow. We can all be better. And gosh, we love it when we have a good leader. Conflict Managed is produced by Third Party Workplace Conflict Restoration Services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back, we have new episodes every Tuesday. And if you haven't had a chance to check out my latest book, How to Be Unprofessional at Work, Tips to Ensure Failure, it's 80 tips of what not to do, and starts a conversation about what to do instead. And if you would please like and subscribe wherever you listen or watch this podcast, that would be appreciated. You can watch this podcast over on YouTube at 3P Conflict Restoration. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.